We are back and we are finishing up the story that we started in the last episode. So we're going to get right into it. We are going to be looking today at the last half of one of the longest stories in the Bible, 4 chapters long, 134 verses. So hopefully you're watching this back to back. If you just jumped into this one, you do need to go back to the previous episode so that we are on this together. So we are continuing now with part 2 of Joseph, his brothers, and a dangerous game. We've looked at chapters 42 and 43. Now, in this episode, we begin with chapter 44, verse 1. It begins this way. Now, Joseph gave these instructions to the steward of his house: fill the men's sacks with as much food as they can carry, and put each man's silver in the mouth of his sack. Then put my cup, the silver one, in the mouth of the youngest one's sack, along with the silver for his grain. And he did as Joseph said. As morning dawned, the men were sent away on their way with their donkeys. Now, if you did have a week between the last one and this one, this is not deja vu. This is a continuing part of the story. The first time they went to Egypt, Joseph put all of their silver back on the top of their sacks, sent them home. They were confused. They came back with double silver. He now is doing the same thing again, only now he's adding his special silver goblet to Benjamin's sack specifically. So he's upping the ante on this. It's not a repeat. It's a similar thing that he's doing, but it's a continuing part of the story. Okay. Verse 4 of chapter 44 now. They had not gone far from the city when Joseph said to his steward, go after these men at once, and when you catch up with them, say to them, why have you repaid good with evil? Isn't this the cup my master drinks from and also uses for divination? This is a wicked thing you have done. So he ups the stakes here. Previously, he didn't send anybody to them. They just discovered the silver by themselves. Now he's sending somebody off to tell them they're in trouble. Verse 6 of chapter 44. When he caught up with them, he repeated these words to them, but they said to him, why does my Lord say such things? Far be it from your servants to do anything like that. We even brought back to you from the land of Canaan the silver we found inside the mouths of our sacks. So why would we steal silver or gold from your master's house? If any of your servants is found to have it, he will die, and the rest of us will become my Lord's slaves. They were so sure of their honesty, because of course they were honest, that they said, you can take us, you can kill us if this happens. And it's a very dangerous, or you can kill the guy who did it, we'll become slaves. This is a dangerous promise, but they knew they hadn't done it, so they thought they were safe in giving it. 44:10. Very well then, he said, let it be as you say. Whoever is found to have it will become my slave. The rest of you will be free from blame. So he says, okay, I'm not going to kill the guy who has it. I'm not going to enslave the rest of you, but the guy who has it, I will enslave. Verse 11. Each of them quickly lowered his sack to the ground and opened it, like they had nothing to hide. Then the steward proceeded to search, beginning with the oldest and ending with the youngest, and the cup was found in Benjamin's sack. At this, they tore their clothes. They all loaded their donkeys and returned to the city. This is an outcome worse than anything they could have imagined. Benjamin is the treasure. He has to be protected at all costs. And now he's in trouble. And they don't know why. 44:14. Joseph was still in the house when Judah and his brothers came in, and they threw themselves to the ground before him. Joseph said to them, what is this you have done? Don't you know that a man like me can find things out by divination? What can we say to my lord? Judah replied. What can we say? How can we prove our innocence? God has uncovered your servant's guilt. We are now my lord's slaves, we ourselves and the one who was found to have the cup. But Joseph said, far be it from me to do such a thing. Only the man who is found to have the cup will become my slave. The rest of you, go back to your father in peace. The key phrase in this part of the story is in the middle of verse 16. God has uncovered your servant's guilt. That's what Judah says to Joseph. They know that this isn't about the cup. Even though they don't know this is Joseph playing this game with them, they know this is not about the cup. This is about their sin of selling Joseph so many years before. And then Joseph gets to the heart of the test. He puts Benjamin's freedom at risk, and he wants to see how are they going to respond. Before, they sold the younger brother into slavery, no problem. Now their younger brother is about to go into slavery, and he wants to see how they're going to react. So Joseph's test, as severe as it was, Joseph's test was fair because it involved the elements of their previous sin. It involved their younger brother's innocence, and it involved their younger brother's freedom or slavery. So we need to be careful about this in our own lives, because in this situation, a lot of us, including me perhaps, would have been seeking vengeance and not truth and fairness. Joseph If he had sought vengeance from his brothers, if he had revealed himself at that point and said, aha, it's me, Joseph, you're all in trouble, nobody would have blamed him. He had every right to seek vengeance for what they did to him. Instead, he gave them the chance to prove their honor. So here's why. Joseph wanted an answer to these important questions. Question number 1, would they sacrifice their younger brother like before? Or 2, would they sacrifice themselves for their younger brother? This is huge, right? This is a big, big deal. Before, they gave Joseph up just because of their ego and their comfort. Daddy likes you better. I mean, they were willing to kill their brother and did indeed sell him into slavery simply because Daddy liked him more. And now they're being asked to sacrifice everything for Benjamin. So this is a valid test, and it's a brilliant test to see how they're going to respond. So how do they respond? Well, they tell the entire story again. We talked earlier about why the repetition happens in this part of the Bible. Here it comes again. Chapter 44, verse 18. Then Judah went up to him and said, pardon your servant, my lord. Let me speak a word to my lord. Do not be angry with your servant, though you are equal to Pharaoh himself. My lord asked his servants, do you have a father or a brother? And we answered, we have an aged father, and there is a young son born to him in his old age. His brother is dead, and he's the only one of his mother's sons left, and his father loves him. Then you said to your servants, bring him down to me so I can see for myself. And we said to my lord, the boy cannot leave his father. If he leaves him, his father will die. But you told your servants, unless your younger brother comes down with you, you will not see my face again. When we went back to your servant, my father, we told him what the Lord had done. Then our father said, go back and buy a little more food. But we said, we cannot go down. Only if our youngest brother is with us will we go. We cannot see the man's face unless our youngest brother is with us. Your servant, my father, said to us, you know that my wife bore me 2 sons. One of them went away from me, and I said, he has surely been torn to pieces. And I have not seen him since. If you take this one from me too, and harm comes to him, you will bring my gray head down to the grave in misery. So now, if the boy is not with us when I go back to your servant, my father, and if my father, whose life is closely bound up with the boy's life, sees that the boy isn't there, he will die. Your servant will bring the gray head of our father down to the grave in sorrow. This is brilliant what he's doing here. He's telling the story and going, you asked us to do this, we did it. You asked us to do this, we did it. You asked us to do this, we did it. You're a part of this. If my dad dies, you're a part of this. And it's risky, but it's a brilliant thing that he does here, right? Verse 32, your servant guaranteed the boy's safety to my father. I said, if I do not bring him back to you, I will bear the blame before you, my father, all my life. Now then, please let your servant remain here as my lord's slave in place of the boy, and let the boy return with his brothers. How can I go back to my father, if the boy is not with me? Do not let me see the misery that would come on my father. At this point, they have passed the tests. And take a look at their concern. It's amazing. My father's life is bound up with the boy's life, as was their father's life with Joseph, and that's why they hated him. But now they see it differently. You'll bring the gray head of our father down to the grave in sorrow. They didn't care before. Now it matters. He says, I told my dad I'll bear the blame, so I'm stepping up to bear it. It's one thing to say the buck stops with me. It's another thing to actually put yourself in the place and go, I promised this would land on me, make it land on me. Wow, that's an amazing thing that he does here, right? So it's complete selflessness. And this response finally breaks Joseph as we jump now to chapter 45, verse 1. There's no jump, it's just the next verse, but it's now in chapter 45. Then Joseph could no longer control himself before all his attendants, and he cried out, have everyone leave my presence. So there's no one with Joseph when he made himself known to his brothers. And he wept so loudly the Egyptians heard him, and Pharaoh's household heard about it. Joseph said to his brothers, I am Joseph. Is my father still living? But his brothers were not able to answer him because they were terrified at his presence. Yeah, I guess so. What? This is one of history's great reveals. I mean, as one of Joseph's brothers, how do you even react to something like this? It isn't even in the realm of possibility. There's no way this is Joseph. He was sold into slavery. At best, he's a slave. At worst, he's dead. Probably he's dead. There's no way he's the guy who's the second most powerful man on the face of the earth. So they just sit there in stunned silence. Chapter 45, verse 4, then Joseph said to his brothers, come close to me. When they had done so, he said, I am your brother Joseph, the one you sold into Egypt. And now do not be distressed, and do not be angry with yourselves for selling me here, because it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you. For 2 years now there has been famine in the land, and for the next 5 years there will be no plowing and reaping. But God sent me ahead of you to preserve for you a remnant on earth and to save your lives by a great deliverance. So then it was not you who sent me here, but God. He made me father to Pharaoh, lord of his entire household, and ruler of all Egypt. This is a hugely important passage, not just in the story, but in scripture. To his still stunned brothers, Joseph did two very important things. One, he forgave them. Take a look at the first thing, one of the first things he said here. Do not be distressed. Do not be angry with yourselves. Right? They are guilty, but they've changed. They're honorable people now. So he forgives them. And redemption is the story of the Bible. From the sin in the garden to forgiveness on the cross and the resurrection of Jesus and the final judgment, it's all about redemption and forgiveness and the bringing back of lost souls from sin to holiness again. He forgave them, and in the middle of it all, of course, gives God the glory. It was not you who sent me here, but God. It was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you. You thought you were controlling this thing, but God was. God did all of this. He forgave them for their sins. He does not tell them they didn't sin. He tells them they were forgiven of their sins. Right? He doesn't forgive them. God has forgiven them. God does the forgiving, and he gives God the glory. 3 times in 4 verses, he gives God the glory. You know, redemption, forgiveness, it's not just the story of the Bible, it's the story we want for our own lives. We all want forgiveness. We all want to be redemption from our past wrongs. So if we want to be forgiven, we have to be forgivers. Joseph knew this, and Joseph is acting that way this time. He forgives his brothers for the sin they did to him. He recognized that God has forgiven them for the sin because they've changed. They've turned their lives around. They've sought forgiveness, and they've received forgiveness. Then Joseph has a long-term plan. Just like he had a plan for Egypt, he now has a plan for the rest of his family, and he now lays it out. 45:9. Now, hurry back to my father and say to him, this is what your son Joseph says. Even anticipating it, can you imagine his father's reaction to this? God has made me Lord of all Egypt. Come down to me, don't delay. You shall live in the region of Goshen and be near me, you, your children and grandchildren, your flocks and herds, and all you have. I will provide for you there, because 5 years of famine are still to come. Otherwise, you and your household and all who belong to you will become destitute. You can see for yourselves, and so can my brother Benjamin, that it is really I who am speaking to you. Tell my father about all the honor accorded me in Egypt and about everything you have seen, and bring my father down here quickly. Then he threw his arms around his brother Benjamin and wept. And Benjamin embraced him, weeping. And he kissed all his brothers and wept over them. Afterwards, his brothers talked with him. So, another amazing story. I mean, how many times does Joseph break down in tears? And deservedly so. I mean, dude, what a story. This is just amazing. So what happens here? Joseph has a plan. Here's what Joseph's plan is. Joseph gave them the land of Goshen, which is like a province of Egypt. And he gave them Goshen specifically for a couple of reasons. First of all, because as he says, it was near where he lived. You can come and live near me. That's near where Joseph lives. So he wants to be around his family. He's very busy. He's got a lot of stuff to do. They need to live near him or he'll never see them. Okay. Joseph has chosen to live there. And again, back to the wisdom thing from a couple of weeks ago, the wisdom of Joseph to choose to live in Goshen is really something. Goshen is one of the main regions of the country that produces so many crops. It's not producing crops now. Nobody is. But Joseph, from the beginning, chooses to live where the crops are being grown because it's his job to preserve those crops. Most people put in his position, second most powerful man in Egypt, therefore being the second most powerful man on the face of the earth as they knew it. He'd live in the city. He'd live in a palace. He'd live next to Pharaoh. He goes, nope, I'm going out into the farming country. Why? Because that's where the job is. Again, it's just such an extraordinary character that Joseph has here. This is like being designated the Secretary of Agriculture when a famine is coming and choosing to live in Nebraska instead of DC. That's what he does. Nope, that's where the work is happening. That's where I'm going to go. Anybody else in that position would have chosen the city. But no, you're going to live near Goshen. That's where the crops are being produced. That's where I live. That's why I chose to live there. Secondly, they were ranchers and farmers. No sense putting them in Cairo. Don't put them in the city. You can't put ranchers and farmers in the city. It doesn't make any sense. Put them where they're comfortable, where they're familiar, where they know how to live. Goshen was the countryside. It's where the crops and herds were raised. They come from farm stock. It makes sense. And then thirdly, it was the region that had and would again supply food for everyone. So he was going to put them in the place that would help the country recover again. So he's thinking way ahead. And this is just part of the wisdom of Joseph and his foresight and his planning. All right. We continue on chapter 4, in the same chapter, verse 16, chapter 45, verse 16. When the news reached Pharaoh's palace that Joseph's brothers had come, Pharaoh and all his officials were pleased. Pharaoh said to Joseph, "Tell your brothers, do this. Load your animals and return to the land of Canaan and bring your father and your families back to me. I will give you the best of the land of Egypt, and you can enjoy the fat of the land. You are also directed to tell them this. Do this. Take some carts from Egypt for your children and your wives, and get your father and come. Never mind about your belongings, because the best of Egypt will be yours." Pharaoh is thrilled for Joseph. I mean, he loves Joseph. Take a look at what Joseph has done and is doing for his country. Pharaoh is thrilled that Joseph has found his family. So he says, go back home, get your father, get your families, use the carts that I'm going to send with you. Use Egyptian U-Hauls, right? I'll even give you carts so you can haul everything back. You won't have to worry about any of that. Leave your stuff, leave your furniture. Don't worry about that. We're going to give you the best houses, the best furniture, the best of everything that Egypt has to offer. There may not be much food, but Egypt is a wealthy country in every other way, and you're going to get everything we can have for you, okay? Chapter 45, verse 21. So the sons of Israel did this. Joseph gave them carts as Pharaoh had commanded, and he also gave them provisions for their journey. To each of them he gave new clothing, but to Benjamin he gave 300 shekels of silver and 5 sets of clothes. And this is what he sent to his father: 10 donkeys loaded with the best things of Egypt, and 10 female donkeys loaded with grain and bread and other provisions for his journey. Then he sent his brothers away, and as they were leaving, he said to them, "Don't quarrel on the way." I love that last line. Those last 5 words crack me up every single time. It's one of the most telling parts of the story that says they really are brothers again. Don't quarrel on the way, right? It's gone from they're terrified, they don't know who he is, he could have vengeance if he wants to sending his brother back, go get dad and don't fight amongst yourselves on the way. By God's grace, they went from plotting murder of their brother to being concerned about quarreling on a road trip. Right? That's what families ought to worry about. Families ought to jokingly refer to each other about don't quarrel on the road trip. That ought to be where families are, instead of plotting the murder of your brother. Okay? But this is what God's grace does. Even in the most dysfunctional of situations, if we will allow ourselves to, God will do that for us. Now, obviously in families, it requires more participation than just one side of the thing, right? Joseph knew he was right with God. He had to test to see if he can let his barriers down, if he could let the boundary down to allow his brothers in. And I guarantee you, if his brothers had proven that they were dishonest, he probably would not have even told them who he was, or he might have sought vengeance on them. We don't know. Sought vengeance. He might have sought vengeance on them. We don't know. He tested them to see, are they honorable? Can I actually have a good family relationship with them? So if you're in a family and looking at it and going, well, I need to do what Joseph did and just bring my family back in. No. He tested them first. He made sure they were honorable. He made sure they were safe people to be around. And only after proving their character and their honor and their honesty did he then say, okay, you're my brothers again. Let's live close to each other again. Let's have it be the way that it should have been. It was only because their character had been tested and they had passed the test. So what happens? How does Jacob then react to this? 45:25. So they went up out of Egypt and came to their father Jacob in the land of Canaan. They told him, Joseph is still alive. In fact, he is ruler of all Egypt, was Jacob's response. Jacob was stunned. He did not believe them. Well, yeah, of course. That's, once again, just the straightforwardness of Scripture. I mean, obviously, that's going to be the answer, right? Verse 27. But when they told him everything Joseph had said to them, and when he saw the carts Joseph had sent to carry him back, the spirit of their father Jacob revived. And Israel said, I'm convinced. my son Joseph is still alive. I will go and see him before I die. I can't, how many weepy moments does this story have? It's just unbelievable. So Jacob's first reaction of disbelief is understandable, but Joseph was wise enough to send proof of his existence to his father. He knew there's no way dad's going to believe this. So I'm sending him so much stuff that he's got to be overwhelmed and go, okay, something's going on here. Because without that proof, Jacob was not going to leave his home for a dead son that was back to life again. That wasn't going to happen. So they leave. And this that we've just described is the last moment of this family in the promised land for over 400 years. They don't realize it at the time, but it is. There's been a thing, I've seen it. People have talked about it on the internet, social media, and so on. Think about it. There are a lot of things in your life that you did for the last time and you didn't know it was the last time. At some point, you had the last moment where you picked up your kids, right? My three kids, they are way too big for me to pick up. There was some point where I picked each one of them up for the last time and didn't know it was the last time, right? There's some point where you're going to kiss a loved one for the last time and you won't know it's the last time. That's what's happening here. They're leaving the promised land for the last time in 400 years. None of the people alive will ever see it again. And none of their descendants will see it again for 400 years. They don't know it. But the story is about to change in a very, very big way. So we now have 3 episodes to go in Genesis, 5 chapters to go. The rest of Genesis is going to take place in Egypt, right? It's something we often don't think about. We think of Genesis all kind of taking place but it doesn't. It starts in modern day Iran, Iraq, in the Garden of Eden, right? It moves into modern day Israel. It goes in and out of Egypt several times, but it ends the last 5 chapters. The next 3 episodes all take place in Egypt. So for those of you who are watching it live week to week, next week, I'm going to tell you what the next series will be. Even if you're watching it later, I'm still going to tell you that, but you might already know what it is depending on how much later you're watching this. That series might be recorded for some of you already by the time you're watching this. But for those of you watching this live as it's happening, I know what the next series is going to be after Genesis. 3 more episodes. But next week, I'm going to tell you what it is so we can prepare for it. All right? We'll see you next week.